What's up, guys? This is Simon from Frozen Card Gaming. I am here with a deck profile for Infernoble Knights. So I want to talk about more or less the deck building philosophy behind this list, why I chose to play certain cards and not other cards, and why I chose to play them at the ratios that I did. So this is a slightly outdated list. This is the one that I brought to LCS V, which was a little over 2 weeks ago. It's gone through some changes since then, so I will talk toward the end of the video about kind of what's changed, what flaws I think the list has, and what I learned from the event. So yeah, kind of go over all of that. The side deck here is not the actual side deck I played for the event, of course. These are just cards I plan to talk about in the second half of the video. So yeah, without further ado, I played 45. I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of the differences between 40 and 60 later in the video, but I wanted to stay reasonably close to 40 so I could see side deck cards. But I wanted to fit in a lot of stuff, so I ended up going a little bit over 40 to accommodate that. So I think it was fine. I played 3 Connector and a Dolphin. I played this over Sublimation Knight because I think it's slightly stronger right now. I think Sublimation Knight definitely is playable, but its strengths are not that pronounced over Connector to the point where you can justify playing it instead of Connector, at least right now in this meta. I played 3 Oliver, 3 Renaud. These are, I think, 2 of the best extenders in the deck. I know a lot of people are on 2 Renaud for whatever reason, which I don't really agree with. I think you just always want to see Renaud pretty much whenever possible. They're both tuners, so in the right hands, they can both extend past Disruption into just your full Fibrax combo. I've covered these in the basic Infernoble combo video on this channel. So I think these 2 are both invaluable. Basically, if you open either of these and you open a Soul, and you don't use either of these to make a Soul, you can almost always just extend past any kind of hand trap on a Soul. So I think these cards are incredible, and they should pretty much always be at 3. For other extenders, I play 3 Red Layer and 3 Fireplant Lady. So Red Layer I've talked about before in the first video again, because if you open Red Layer in addition to your combo, it makes a free Savage. So I think the level is useful. I think it's useful as a 2k beater that doesn't activate the summon, so that's another niche that it has. I talked briefly in the first video about how you can beat over stuff like Ecclesia and Herald of the Arclight with this card, so I think that makes it really solid. Probably the best warrior extender apart from Fireflint, and I think it gives it an edge over cards like Shade Brigandine, for example, which activate and have worse stats. And once in a blue moon, it has an effect where when you normal or special summon it, you can target another super quan and add it back. So if you have 2 red layers, you have one in your hand and one in your grave, you can actually just loop it in longer games, which has come up for me in the past. So I think this card's really good. I do side at the 3rd occasionally, but I think if, for just your main deck, I think you want to go with 3. And then Fireflint, I think, is also just the best extender in the deck. Fireflint covers for a lot of the weaknesses that Connector has. So previously, when you would play Connector without Fireflint, this was the testing we were doing in like June or July. And when Connector got hand trapped, you would have no follow-up because you couldn't summon the Renaud afterwards. So that was a weakness of Connector that we perceived, but Fireflint just solves all of it because you can just search her with Durendal. So she patches up the weaknesses of Connector, and also if you open Dolphin plus your Fireflint, that's good as well. She's just always a free special summon, and she also lets you summon Gambit from the hand. There are some really weird hands where you can summon Ogier from the hand. So I think she's just a really incredible card, and you should pretty much always play 3. I also do occasionally side the 3rd copy out when siding, just because I don't want to see multiples in crucial game 2 and game 3s. So that is another kind of free side out slot, which is nice. So those are all the extenders. I max out on them for pretty obvious reasons, and then I don't play additional cards like Shade Brigandine, although I could easily see, if you wanted to play like a 1 of Shade Brigandine in here, I think that's totally justifiable. And then for other cards, I played 1 Gearfried, 1 Ogier. I'll talk more about this kind of in the tech card section over in the side deck over here. 1/1 is not necessarily uncommon. So, for example, Kamal played 1 of each in his list, and he was the only one to get top 8 of the event. Some people are on extra copies of Gearfried, which I think is justifiable. Some people are on extra copies of Ogier, which I don't like nearly as much, because my problem with Ogier is always that he's only really good when you see Renaud in addition to him, and apart from that, he's just a worse normal summon than every other normal summon in the deck, like Connector or Sublimation Knight. So I'm really hesitant to play this card at any more than one, but I think kind of the debate between ratios of Gearfried and Ogier is something that has been talked about for a long time, and might not even get solved anytime soon. So I think there's still a bit of testing to do to determine which one is better, and people will continue to play different ratios, which is fine. The one of Genba, this card is really important for a lot of the standard combos, so I don't think I need to go over this one too much. And then the one O-Line and the one Jet. I chose to play Jet over Vylon Sphere. I'll talk about this more in the side deck as well, but I think O-Line plus Jet is standard. And then in my list, I chose to play 9 hand traps. I played 3 Ash, 3 Gamma and a Driver, and 3 Imperms. Basically, I felt that if you played a small amount of hand traps, it just wouldn't do anything. Like, it wouldn't be sufficient. If you wanted to play hand traps, you should, I think, commit to it, I guess, in the sense that you want to see hand traps all the time going second. You want to open multiple hand traps against combo going second. So I thought that it didn't make sense to play 3 or even 6 hand traps in the main when your deck could accommodate more. So I chose to play a total of 9 hand traps. And then I think these are just some of the best hand traps right now. I think Ash could have been Nibiru, but Ash was good against everything. I was a little concerned about Dogmatica as well, so Ash was good for negating stuff like Nadir. And then Gamma is insane right now. This card is, I think, one of the only hand traps that is good against every deck. Even against like Dogmatica decks, this was put in a lot of work because you can negate the Ecclesia. Against Invoked, you can negate the Alistair, and then they don't have a body to summon the Ecclesia afterwards. So I just thought this was the best hand trap to play. And then Imperms are because we weren't sure at the time how many people would play Talents because LCS was like the weekend of Rise of the Duelist release. And so hand traps that, were monsters always had this kind of drawback where you weren't sure if you were going to get punished by Talents or not. And so Imperm just lets you not have to think about that. Imperm also beats Gearfried, which is nice. And so this is just, really good hand trap. Not really much to go about. For the spells, we maxed out on the Rotas, obviously. 3 Durendal, 3 Heritage, not much to say there. I played 3 Talents in the main, 3 copies of 3 Tactical Talents, rather. So this card has been debated pretty heavily. I'm still not really confident that it's the correct decision to play this card. But the idea behind Talents in this deck is kind of similar to the idea of Talents in Adamancipator, where most of the time, your hands are good enough that you can beat 1 hand trap, but you can't beat 2, is the idea at least. So in theory, what happens is you are comboing and they will drop a negate on like your connector, for example, like maybe they'll ash you or they'll veil you or something. And you drop talents afterwards, you look at their hand, you take out their other hand trap, or if they don't have another hand trap, you take out their best engine card. And then you summon your extender and you continue to combo. And so talents kind of ensured that you comboed through 2 hand traps, and you could also resort to kind of the draw or the take control effect and other weird game states. So that was kind of the reasoning for playing this card in the main deck as just a way to ensure that kind of the combos go through. But in practice, that is not always what happens. A lot of the times, you would stare down, I think, an Imperm or just an Imperm, and your talents would be dead the whole time. Or you would wish your talents would have been maybe another extender instead of what it was. And so I think this card is another card that is going to be discussed and kind of debated rapidly over this format. And I think it'll never be like 100% sure whether it's correct to play this card or not. There's a lot of good arguments for and against it. And so I chose to main it. It was actually fine for me in the main personally, but that is anecdotal evidence. So I would encourage you to do some testing with this card and just see how it feels. For equips, I only played 3. I played Phoenix Blade, Smoke Grenade, and Fossil. Fossil is the best one for extending. So there are combos that I've shown in the previous 2 videos where you dump Fossil with a soul and you add it back with Renaud. One of those is the one that guarantees you play through Nibiru every time. So that is the main reason I played Fossil over another card like Autonomous Action Unit or Overdone Burial or any of the kind of board breaking equips like the Noble Arms that destroy sets or like Axe of Fools. I don't think those are really necessary, and Fossil just has the most utility in combos. Phoenix Blade we were actually considering cutting for a long time, several months ago, back when we were testing this deck for Bears Cup, because we couldn't really figure out how to make use of the discard, and we wanted to minimize the number of quips we played. And then we learned about Genba, and then about a month after that, we learned about the Herald combos that we could do with Genba, and so Phoenix Blade became necessary as a card to add back that we could pitch for Jet under Herald. So The blade is mandatory now, so that's just in there. And then I play Reborn, Rhoda, these are self-explanatory, and that is it for the main deck. For the extra, I played Savage, which is explanatory. I played 2 Herald because I was a big fan of the double Herald combo before this tournament. There were like a lot of like combos where you would have like a level 3 token left over and you wouldn't know what to do with it, and if you just happened to open Oliver or Renaud as you know, an extender, the second Herald was just very natural to make. So I played 2. This never really came up for me, and there's actually one game where I think I went for double Herald plus the Charles hand loop against Ryan Yu, who was on striker, and he still mined me through it during his turn because his hand was just that insane that he managed to mine me through double Herald. So the one time I did make it in a tournament, it did not pan out that well, but I'm not sure if I would stick with this going forward. I think it's just very easy to make, and so I would probably end up keeping it, but a lot of players saw success with only 1 Herald, so yeah. Charles, Roland, these are mandatory. Marcher is mandatory, and then Omega to kind of play as a level 8 to ladder during the combo, because you need to burn through level 8 for free to get through your Charles. Omega actually put in a lot of work in the graveyard. He shuffled back multiple Sanguines for me during the tournament, so that was just nice. I'm probably going to keep playing Omega in the future. I see no reason to kind of change off of him. For links, I played Access Code because I think this is just the easiest card to go for a game with. There are so many times where you have either a Charles or a Savage or Gearfried, which in conjunction with a 5300 access code is just always game. So I thought it was just an auto include. And then I played 2 Fibrax. A lot of people were on 1. I played 2 because they found that you needed the extra bot, or it didn't need, but it was a lot easier to go for game when you had the second Fibrax, especially in games also where your first one gets negated and you have to play the long game. The second one is really invaluable there. 2 Isolde, I think everyone is on 2 Isolde, so this is pretty self-explanatory. There were a lot of hands where the Isolde ad effect got Gambit or something, or it got like just impermed even, and the second Isolde just came in clutch. So I think you'd always play 2. I ended up playing Unicorn for this event. I did want some kind of utility in the extra deck, and the idea behind this one is that a lot of times if you resolve your Assault combo, you set up for next turn with another Assault very easily kind of ready to be made. So the idea was that you would just go Isolde into Unicorn into Access Code, and you would clear through whatever kind of board they had managed to produce after your turn 1. And then the Unicorn would just pump Access Code to 53, because you would have already have burned through your Borodon at that point. So that was kind of the idea behind Unicorn. In the future, I don't really know if I'd run this card again. I think this was fine for the event. I think Nightmares are just nice to have. You can out Floodgates with them, and just weird, troublesome cards that you couldn't really out otherwise. But I don't know if this card is needed, so I think I'm going to kind of flip-flop on this card going forward. And then Linkross and Aurodon for the extra deck combo pieces. So I think the extra is pretty straightforward. This is kind of similar to most extra decks right now. I think the very standard ones, if I had to custom cards, I think if you take this, and take this out, I think almost every Noble deck is playing more or less these 12 cards and then some additional flex spots. So I think that's pretty standardized at this point, and there's not much else to say about that. So that was the main bulk of what I played for this event. And I do want to talk about some of the other cards I considered and kind of why they did or did not make the cut. In this part of the video, I want to talk about some cards that are either tech options that people have been playing, or they might have been cards that YouTubers have covered, or cards that are kind of upcoming that people are considering playing in this deck. So the first of these is Sublimation Knight. And so first off, this card kind of directly competes with Connector as a normal summon that summons Isolde by itself. You'd play this with Squeak Knight, obviously, and I think this card is really good. I was on this card instead of Connector for quite a long time, a couple months ago, before we kind of knew about Fireflint Lady, back in like June or July, testing for Varus Cup. And the strengths of this card are that you can search him off Durendal, which is really relevant going second to have a 1-card Isolde searchable off Durendal. And the problem with Connector at the time was that he would get negated, and then it would be very hard to follow up negated Connector compared to Subknight, which has 3 extra copies of Renaud as an extender. So that was kind of the idea behind why we played Subknight instead. But I think now that Fireflint is known and that the hand traps in the format are kind of what they are right now, I think Connector is a little better currently. Subknight is also bad into cards that get rid of him because they essentially get rid of both him and the Squeak Knight once he's equipped, because if they flip like a Conquistador or a Dogmatic Punishment, then you're in a lot of trouble because they've gotten rid of 2 cards for 1, and that's a lot of value for them. Whereas Connector will just always summon the Dolphin if that effect doesn't get negated and the pop doesn't do anything. So I think between the two, Connector was just a better card to play. The other option was playing both. So if you've seen Kamal's list, he plays 40 cards and he plays both Connector and Subknight, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think you're going to clog on normals too much if you play 40 and you play both 1 card assaults. And I think playing both is probably the correct way to go, but I think you have to play like 50 cards or above. That's my opinion, at least. So I wouldn't really go into that territory if I played like under 45-ish. But yeah, so because I didn't want to stay closer to 40 for this list, I ended up playing just a Connector, and I chose to pass up Subknight. But I think Subknight is better than people give him credit for. There's actually a lot of utility with this effect where you can equip like even a Gearfried, for example, instead of the Squeak Knight, and you can make use of cards like Renaud and Monster Reborn, for example, to kind of get maximum mileage out of his effect. But in this list, I didn't play him for those reasons. The next kind of hotly debated piece is how many Gearfried you should be playing. So before this event, I was pretty convinced that 1 Gearfried, 1 Ogier was just the best ratio. The thing with Ogier is that he's only good when you open Renaud. And so although the combo does search Gearfried, you didn't want to quote-unquote brick on Ogier because he wasn't combo by himself. He's not a 1 card Isolde. And you wouldn't open Renaud with him that often when you bumped up Ogier to additional copies, because currently we have like 7 Rotas, right? So if you play 1 Ogier, you play 8 Ogier, more or less. And that meant that you were pretty likely to see the combo that searched Gearfried even when you only played 1 copy. So that was the idea. In practice, there's a couple things that make this not as true as it should be. One is that Durendal is a little awkward to use. If you open like Durendal plus Renaud, for example, that's not the Gearfried combo, which you would think it is if you just treat this as a Rota, but it's not that simple in a lot of cases. The other thing with Gearfried is that Gearfried is one of the only cards you can brick on in this deck, and so if you just didn't have the equip to banish for Gearfried, if you like didn't have a way to make a soul, and your additional copy of Gearfried could have been like an extender or something that helped you make a soul, then that would have been bad. And so the philosophy behind 1/1 is that Gearfried is really searchable. You can fetch him for turn 3 100% of the time, and you can fetch him turn 1 with the Ogier Renaud combo very reliably a lot of the time. And so it didn't feel like it was necessary to play these in more copies. And then watching matches of the actual LCS, Gearfried put in a ton of work. Like this card put in an insane amount of work at a lot of matches at that event. So I think people, this card does kind of carry the deck a lot of the time. And so I think you could definitely bump up this card to additional copies. I don't know if it's necessarily correct, but I think it's important to kind of look at it outside the lens of, what are the mathematical odds I open combo all the time, because Gearfried as just like a card by itself does a lot of work and sometimes will single-handedly just carry the deck. So I think this is going to be, kind of debated for a while, the correct numbers. I'm probably still going to be on 1/1 for a while, but you can definitely justify more copies. The last Noble Knight card that I want to talk about was Astolfo. So I chose not to play Astolfo, but a lot of people did end up playing him. So my idea was that Astolfo is basically a different Fireflint lady that has a slightly higher chance of bricking and wasn't useful enough to justify playing in the main deck. I was playing him before for the same reason that I was on 1 Ogier. It's because you have, like 8 Rotas or 7 Rotas. So if you play 1 copy of Astolfo, you essentially play 8 copies of Astolfo, and that meant that you could just have the free warrior extender pretty much at any point. But Firefly really accomplishes the same niche, and the only reason you would play Astolfo would be if you wanted to make use of his level modulation effect. Because the other effect that has like a gold Sark thing that takes 2 standby phases to do is, I think, it's like it's so slow that it will almost never come up in the majority of your games, which you should typically just win right away. But yeah, I think the main reason you would play him is for the level modulation, because otherwise Firefly does pretty much the same thing. And I couldn't really figure out enough viable uses for his level modulation effect to justify playing him. So I did really want to trim as much fat as possible from this list, and he just didn't make the cut for that reason. Next up, I'm going to talk about some of the sync-related cards. The first of these is Tatsunoko. I feel like in the first video, I was a little hard on Tatsunoko. I outlined a couple reasons why I prefer going for Herald early over the Tatsunoko. I still do stand by that, but after some discussion, I do think this card has a lot of benefits that are worth considering. So to recap some stuff in the first video, my points were that when you have your Marcher and your Link-Cross token and a Genba, it's a little more efficient to just go Marcher plus a token directly into Herald, because going for Savage with the Tatsunoko means that, first of all, you burn your Assault ad on a red layer, which is a little annoying. It deprives you of a card for next turn, and sometimes you don't want to use the Assault ad. And also on the Savage, if you get Nibiru'd, then it's a big loss of resources for you, because you also lose out on kind of 2 spots in your extra deck that you could have used for other things. It's like you won't be able to make Savage that game anymore, for example. But there are some advantages. The most notable one, in my opinion, is that Savage is just a really beefy body. He goes up to usually around 4,500 or 50 attack if you equip the Aurodon, which is pretty common. And so having that big attacking monster is actually a lot more relevant than you think it is in a lot of scenarios. So one of these is if you're against another combo deck and you Dark Ruler them. You still need to have monsters that can kill their monsters and out the board. Because one problem with this deck, which you may have noticed if you've played it a bit, is that sometimes you have trouble breaking through established boards, especially if you don't draw Gearfried. Because Charles is one of your bigger monsters that can attack stuff, and it has a pop. But apart from that, if you're going Herald early, the Herald isn't really killing anything. So you have just the Herald and the Charles if you don't go for the Tatsu route. But with the Tatsu route, you have another beater that can attack over boss monsters. So that is a surprisingly relevant thing that comes up sometimes. Adding on to this, there is another niche, which is that sometimes you want to go for game when you go second off of just your basic combo. You don't want to like make your board and then give them another turn, because sometimes it means the difference between winning or not if you can go for game that turn. So one relevant interaction is if you can make Savage before your Fiber, which is very doable with the Tatsu combo. You can just go Fiber Summon Jet, laddering into one of your Link 3s, and then making Access Code Talker. An access code plus your Savage is 8k, but if you went for Herald instead, then access code plus the Herald isn't game. You would need to have like a Gearfried or something apart from that. So having Tatsu being able to guarantee game in those strange game states where you can just OTK very easily going second is, I think, relevant. Because there are other scenarios, for example, like if you want to do the standard combo and you end on like a Rorodon plus your Charles and whatever, where you just don't have enough damage, and you can maybe clear their whole board, but if they have a lot of like, if you're against Outlich and they have a lot of graveyard effects, you just don't want to give them another turn. So having that niche, I think, is important. And then some other minor stuff. If you play Tatsu and you draw a driver, you can go for the combo that I showed in the advanced videos video, or the advanced combos video rather, where you add a level 6 warrior off of his hold, like Feed Mega Cyber, and you just use Tatsu at level 6, in this case driver, to go into Charles, and that's just an extra negate off of your assault combo, which is, I think, funny. I think it's a nice way to use your driver. That's more of a meme than anything else. And the last one is a really, really big brain combo that the Disciples posted on their channel a couple days ago. Where when you open Olion, there's an option you can do where you use Tatsu to make Omega very early, and after making Charles, you use Omega to shuffle the Olion back into your deck, summon it off of the Aurodon later. So I think that is just another kind of minor point in favor of Tatsu that maybe makes this card, I think, worth considering again. The next card is going to be TG Hyper Librarian. This one I think is very popular online because people love to draw cards. It's one of the most fun things to do in this game. So I'm pretty sure Cody plays this card. Also from LCS, Kamal played this card in his deck. So, I mean, obviously the advantages of this card are that you can draw multiple cards. In the advanced combos video, I showed a draw 3 combo that was under Herald, and I showed a draw 7 combo, which is, I think, pretty widely known at this point, where you just, like the obscene amount of cards you draw generally just ensures that you win the game. So why wouldn't you play this card, right? Well, one of the issues is that you're not really, like, you're not Outlich, for example. Your combos generally are really strong, and so what is the point of Librarian, right? So when you're drawing cards, is it winning you the games that you would have lost otherwise, or is Librarian just kind of drawing you cards in an already won game? So that's kind of been my biggest problem with Librarian, is that the cards you draw, if you're kind of in a position where you can draw a ton of cards off Librarian, you were generally in a winning position anyway, because your standard combo is already outputting like 2 negates plus a hand loop, for example. And so the amount of games where the cards you draw off Librarian are the reason you win, I think, are very, very limited. So that would be, I think, the main reason why, or the main argument against Librarian. And similarly, Formula, I've noticed Formula mainly being used in Librarian combos, and apart from that, I don't think it comes up that much. I think there are some minor scenarios where you end up with too many level 1s, and you do actually want to make board space for your Auroradon, but I don't think this has come up enough for me in practice to justify playing this card. So I personally don't play Formula. I've also really only seen it coupled with Librarian, but if there's uses for this card outside of Librarian combos that are consistent and justify the spot, I would definitely give this card a second thought. The next card we're going to talk about is Vylon Sphere, which is primarily just another level 1 machine tuner you can summon off Fiber to ladder into Auroradon, so it kind of competes with Jet Synchron in these lists. The primary appeal of Sphere is that you can more or less search any equip in your deck, because what will happen is Assault will mill Durendal and some other equip, for example, Living Fossil. And then when you go into Auroradon, your Sphere will equip the Durendal back to itself, and then Durendal will get Renode, and Renode will get back the other equip that you milled. So they both, in terms of bodies that they provide, Sphere and Jet both give the extra level 1 tuner, because Sphere will get you to Renode, whereas Jet will just summon itself back, so they'll both get you that tuner. But then Sphere will additionally get you any equip in your deck, which is kind of like appealing on a surface level, but if you look into it more, you start to realize that Sphere requires both Durendal and Renode to not have been used yet to work, essentially. So it can be a little awkward if you've been forced to use Renode or Durendal to make your Assault or to extend past Disruption after your Assault. And in those situations, you sometimes really want the Jet to be able to put up like a board. A lot of the times the Jet is the difference to whether or not you make Charles or whether you're at level 8. So cutting Jet for Vylon Sphere can be awkward in these situations where you're kind of, you have to use Durendal or Renode to combo. So those are the reasons I personally didn't play Sphere. There is an interesting option, which is when you play closer to 60 cards, you can play both Jet and Sphere. And that basically you would just go for Sphere when you're able to go for the combo that requires Durendal and Renode, and you would go for Jet otherwise. And so I think that is an interesting option. That could be, potentially very useful in the larger lists with more than 60 cards. Or sorry, more than 40 cards. Whereas if you play closer to 40, I would just pick one of the two, because you're just going to brick on tuners otherwise. The next card is Adhara. So this was, I would say, popularized by Shenping. I think he's the only one that was on this before, and so this is kind of an option going forward. There's a couple good things and a couple bad things. So my personal philosophy on this is that I'm not a fan of cards that just say special summon a tuner. You'll notice I'm not playing E-tailing in this list either. That's because I wanted to make this list more reliable to combo off of his Assault. I didn't want to focus too hard on Fiber combo. I wanted to kind of emphasize that Fiber combo was the backup, and that we were focusing on getting Assault to resolve, and I think that put a lot more pressure on the opponent. But Adhara is interesting because there's some utility with it when you open like Adhara plus Connector, for example. Shenping has some interesting combos in his channel that you can check out. And the other utility is that if you summon this after you get hit by Nibiru, because the token is a normal monster, you can still summon this when you have the token, and then you just go into Fiber after that. Which is, I think, an interesting niche over other special summon tuner monsters. My problem with it is that you have to actively choose to not Adhara at the start of your combo for that to be an option. So it puts you into this weird dilemma where you're making your board worse by choosing the safe route, which is not the end of the world if you're playing safely. But it was just always kind of a dilemma of like, if you had Adhara plus a combo hand, did you summon it at the beginning or not? So that was kind of one of my issues with it. And there's other minor stuff like how it conflicts with Red Layer. I will say it's quite interesting that it can combo with Ogier because Shenping also plays Ignoble Knight of Laundsallyn, which is another interesting option, I think. But I think the Ignoble synchro, for me personally, just has too many issues that kind of prevent it from being as good as it could be. So the main problems are that this card is not fire, it's a dark, and you can't use any level 4, you have to use a non-tutor Noble Knight. So I think if you could make this with like Connector plus Adhara, it'd be way, way better. And I think even if it was just fire, it'd be way better, because if it was fire, you could go Ogier, dump Gearfried, and then you would summon the Adhara. You would summon the Adhara first, obviously, and you'd go into Ignoble, add Renode, and then combo off that way. But because it's not a fire, you can't do that play, and that means that Adhara plus Ogier is not the Gearfried combo, which is, I think, just really annoying. And I think all these minor things just kind of pushed me away from playing cards like Adhara. And similarly, I'm just not playing the Ignoble Synchro. I don't think it comes up enough to justify the spot. And in with the vanilla list that doesn't play Adhara, the only time this ever comes up really is when you open Ogier plus Renode with no way to get Durendal in the graveyard. Because what Laundsallyn does in that scenario is it gives you the equip to banish for Gearfried before you summon a soul. Next up is Coral Dragon. This is kind of a catch-all for any synchro or any extra card in general that just says draw 1 and doesn't do much else. So this includes Formula Synchron and also cards like Stardust Charge Warrior. You would normally go into this when you summon Oliver off his old, or you just do the combo with Oliver, where you end up with Roland plus Marcher and a bunch of level 3 tokens. Because you could just climb into this for free before making Charles, and you just get a card. So one of the philosophies behind this list for LCS was that we wanted to trim as much fat as possible. So if it wasn't necessary and it didn't really help us win, then you just wouldn't play it, which is, pretty simple now that I say it out loud like that. And so the issue with the drawing cards off Coral is that you were already comboing and you would resolve the majority of your cards by that point. And so the cards you were drawing weren't really adding on to the strength of your overall board, and they weren't really helping you play past extra disruption because you had already finished your combo. So you were already kind of in a winning position when you had resolved the Coral draw. And so we just cut cards like that. So that's the reason I didn't play Coral in this list. But I think looking back in retrospect, at least, Coral specifically has some utility because it can get rid of stuff. And I mentioned this when talking about Tatsunoko, but this deck does have trouble getting rid of cards sometimes, specifically back row. So I think that is one very important role that Coral could play if you do end up playing this card. Just the ability to pop cards on demand. And the discard is not really relevant because you do have Phoenix Blade, and you also get draw out of it, so that's nice. Last up is Chaos Ruler. Last up for the synchros, at least, is Chaos Ruler. This is a card that is primarily just competition for Omega because you do need to burn a level 8 synchro. So Chaos Ruler has a chance to just give you a free card, and it also has an effect that brings it back. So I didn't play this because I didn't play that many light hand traps or light cards in general that were live off of this Chaos Ruler. Like, you didn't really care about adding Connector. You don't care about adding Gamma because you end up with monsters. And so I just didn't play Chaos Ruler in this list. The other thing is that there's not really dark monsters in this deck that you can use to summon back the Chaos Ruler. So the two cards that I play are like Savage and like a Unicorn. So it's coming back, just never mattered. I think this card has a lot of potential in future combos. There's actually a really cool one that I figured out on in a team chat I'm in, where you use Muddy Mud Dragon to fuse with Chaos Ruler to summon Dragoon, which is, I think, pretty funny. I don't know if it's practical, but I think this card has a lot of potential, not only in this deck, but in just combo decks in general. And I'm interested to see what people come up with going forward. But for this list, for this iteration of this list at least, we just didn't bother playing Cast Ruler. And Omega just had so many other strengths, especially against Eldritch, that this card was Cast Ruler itself just didn't make the cut. Next up, I'm going to briefly talk about equips. So some specific ones like Autonomous, and other ones in terms of just general like equip, spell, philosophy, and how many we played. and why I think this is kind of now the standard equip lineup for most Infernoble lists. So for Autonomous first, this was a card I was on a couple months ago when we were practicing for Verse Cup, because that was, first of all, kind of a limbo format. So Dragoon was legal in that format, and so you could like take Dragoon with Autonomous, which is pretty funny. And also, at the time, Valor was very popular. Valor and even Ghostmourner. This is around that time, so you could take their hand trap after they hand trap your Assault, and the hand trap was usually a tuner, so you would just go into Fiber with it afterwards. And so that was the utility of Autonomous at the time. Now I think Fossil is more standard because you can combo with it. First of all, you can like dump this with the Soul and then just add it back with Renaud, and you can improve your boards. You can also play through Nibiru with this. I showed that combo in the first video. And so I think Fossil is kind of pretty standard in most of these lists now. It's better than like all the other equips pretty much. The only other comparable one is like DDR, and I don't think I played DDR just yet. I think Fossil is just better to draw. And I think this number of equips is also kind of standard now because most people are playing Genba or some level 2 warrior tuner like TG Striker, to the point where you don't have to, like, this isn't Dark Warrior, you don't have to mill 4 to combo. You can usually just mill 2 in most games. I think I summoned Genba off Assault like 90-95% of the time, instead of Oliver. But playing this number of equips lets you have the option to still mill 4 for Oliver most of the time. So that's like just nice utility, I think. And I mentioned before that at some point we even considered cutting Phoenix Blade, because we were content to mill 2 for Genba or mill 1 for Renaud. But Phoenix Blade comes up as discard fodder for Jet under Herald, and in general, this lineup is just, I think, solid. Phoenix Blade also comes up for equipping to Gearfried in some like really weird hands where you summon Gearfried after you've like equip something to Assault. So I think this is standard for a reason. Smoke is obviously mandatory, and this is, I think, just the best lineup. Closing this video out, I'm not talking about grass specifically, but I think talking about the concept of playing closer to 40 versus playing closer to 60, or just playing 60 outright in this deck. So for LCS, the concept was that we wanted to play closer to 40 to see side deck cards and power cards like hand traps. And we thought that was important because it was like a really volatile format with a lot of really high power decks. And so against a deck like Emancipator post side, you like really need to see cards like Dark Ruler or Sphere Mode or your hand traps that you put in. And so you're not going to see this as often with 60. So that was the rationale for playing closer to 40. I was actually on 42 before, and I wasn't playing Ashes. And I wanted to fit in an extra set of hand traps. And I found out, I did like 100 test hands playing 42 without Ash and playing 45 with Ash. And the combo rate of the deck actually stayed the same. It actually went up slightly. And the number of hands where I drew a hand trap in the opening hand went up by like 20%. So I went with 45 with this lineup. And the interesting thing behind that testing is that it showed that your consistency doesn't go down really when you play additional cards, especially if they're engine cards. Because what happens is that the consistency boost you get from drawing your garnets less frequently kind of counterbalances the additional cards that you put in. So I think you could apply that philosophy and just build this as 60 and just play a bunch of, like, you'd play this and you'd play Sub Knight, you'd play probably 3 Gearfried, and you'd just like max out on extenders, and then a bunch of utility cards like Tactics, which I think is a viable way. You'd be building it a lot like Dragon Link was built back when 60 card was, or I guess still is, the standard for Dragon Link. And this deck gets a lot of comparisons to Dragon Link because we both have a lot of 1-card starters that go into kind of the full explosive combo. I think the difference is that Dragon Link, the Garnets are a little more deadly to draw, and their engine is a little more robust than ours is. They have like more choke points where like you have to stop them at these points or else they'll get like this. Whereas for our deck, we have fewer, I guess, clearly defined choke points that are deadlier when they get stopped. So an example of that is just like Dragon Link now makes Herald before Fiber, so you have to stop the Romulus. Then you have to typically stop the fiber, you have to stop the LP, and then even after you stop LP, they can still just have Tracer and go into Savage. And so we don't have that same amount of like multi-step combo process. So I think that's the main argument for playing this closer to 40 and not 60, because our engine is not as good as Dragon Link's, but we have a lot more to do off Assault, and we can guarantee that the Assault resolves. So I chose to play closer to 40. I think in the future I'd like to experiment more with like 50 card lists, and I think just the appeal of not drawing Garnets is just excellent. Like, I've been so frustrated by this deck and just drawing Garnets. I think I had a tournament match in LCS last week where I drew Dolphin, Genba, O-Lion, Jet, and like a hand trap or something. It was really frustrating, and that's definitely the biggest appeal of playing over 40. The last one I'm going to talk about is Red Ice Dragoon, and I've been rambling for like 30 minutes at this point, so this might not be super coherent, but we're close to the end, so just bear with me. And Dragoon is, I think, a pretty feared card. A lot of people are kind of worried about how this card's going to affect our format, because it did warp the OCG format very heavily. And I think that it's going to make an impact, but I don't necessarily know if Infernoble is going to be the deck that it does it in. Because with combo decks, the issue is that you have to kind of weigh out whether Dragoon is actually like helping you win games, or whether you're just making your end board beefier for no actual benefit. So I haven't found that many combos with this card that give you additional negates, pretty much. And I never really thought that the number of negates was the problem for this deck anyway. I mentioned in the combo videos that you can have like YouTube combos that play actual Garnets and do super convoluted lines to get like more advantage, but that was never really necessary, and they don't really patch the weaknesses of the deck. So, like when you can already go Librarian draw 6, is the Dragoon adding that much to your end board if you choose to go like a riskier route, or are you just playing like Dark Magician in your deck for no reason at this point? So I'm a little skeptical on like splashing Verte into this deck. I think if you do play Verte, Red Ice Fusion, and Dragoon in this deck, you'd play it in a 60 card build for sure, just because you already have enough issues as it is drawing Garnets. The other interesting part is that there are some combos with Chaos Ruler and Money Mud Dragon where you fuse for this card right away. And the issue with that is that they typically replace some other negate. So instead of like ending on Herald Savage Charles, you're ending on Herald Dragoon Charles instead. And I think you're just going to beat most things with Herald Savage Charles anyway. And Dragoon is not beating the things that you would have lost to if you had like a Savage instead of a Dragoon. So that's been my main issue with this card in this deck. I'm not really expecting Infernoble to play this deck moving forward, but I think people will try to put this in basically every deck, so it's something to look out for. And playing against this deck, we have a couple outs. I think Gearfried in particular is very useful for just getting rid of Dragoon, and we can also bump over it with our own big synchro monsters like Charles and Savage to just beat over it sometimes. So I think we are prepared for this card coming forward. And in general, that's going to, I guess, sum up my thoughts on all of these cards that I want to talk about, as well as the list that I brought. This list going forward has changed. We have some interesting new texts that I'm unfortunately not going to reveal quite yet in this channel, but there's some fun new cards that we're playing with, and some other really interesting things I've seen online as well. There was a profile I watched like today that played stuff like Spell Striker, so I think there's a lot of innovation that is running around. OCG is playing really crazy Wompo combos with the new PK cards and Phantom Rage and stuff like Powerful Dragon to reveal 3 Durendal and add like other cards. It's crazy. So I'm excited to see how this deck changes going forward. I hope you enjoy listening to me ramble on about this deck and the card choices for like half an hour. That's going to do it for this profile and this discussion. And yeah, like and subscribe for more content like this, and let me know what else you want to see about this deck.